A sneering laugh, sharp as thorns, pierced the morning stillness. The fragrant vanilla muffin slipped from Sergeant Evelyn Reed's grasp, tumbling onto the polished marble floor of the university cafe. Her eyes briefly dropped, a fleeting attempt to compose herself, but the young student, seemingly emboldened by her momentary lapse, erupted into louder peals of mirth, echoing through the increasingly silent knowledge nook. "You served in the military." A shrill voice pierced the calm, dripping with contempt. "America must be really desperate." Evelyn froze in her wheelchair, partly in shock, partly from a familiar pang of pain. Her wrist, a silent testament to years of dedication, still bore the familiar paracord bracelet woven in the red, white, and blue of the American flag. Her heart constricted, but her face remained eerily calm. 30 minutes later, the entire cafe seemed to vibrate. The roar of engines from outside, powerful and authoritative, filled the morning air. When the doors swung open, the whole place held its breath. Dozens of soldiers in combat gear poured in, their sharp gazes sweeping the room. Who had called them, and why were they here? If you're outraged, type shame in the comments to stand with those who sacrifice for our country. Every morning at precisely 8:15, Sergeant Evelyn Reed wheeled herself into Mike's Cafe for breakfast. Today she was invited to the prestigious National University to give a presentation on the power of will and recovery after military trauma, part of a series on courage and resilience. At 39, her upper body strength was impressive, a reminder of her military past and her current reality. The wheelchair had been part of her life for 6 years now, ever since that fateful day in Kandahar when she'd spotted the IED seconds before the convoy rolled over it. She'd managed to yell a warning, saving 3 young soldiers, but at the cost of her own legs. Morning Evelyn called Mr. Arthur, the cafe owner, with salt and pepper hair and a kind smile from behind the counter. Usual. Evelyn nodded with a warm smile. "Please, and maybe extra napkins today." She wore simple closed jeans, a plain blue t-shirt, but always kept 2 items with her: a bracelet made from paracord in red, white, and blue, and a carefully folded letter from the president thanking her for saving 3 young soldiers. The letter rarely left her pocket, but knowing it was there gave her strength on harder days. Today was indeed becoming one of those days. As she navigated toward her usual corner table, her wheelchair caught on an uneven floor tile. The muffins she'd just received tumbled from her lap onto the freshly mopped floor. "Damn," she whispered, reaching down awkwardly. From a nearby table, laughter erupted, harsh and mocking. 3 young men, clearly college-aged, wearing expensive sneakers and designer clothes, were pointing at her. "Nice moves," said the tallest one, named Blake, his voice deliberately loud and full of scorn. "And they let you handle weapons." Evelyn ignored them, focusing on retrieving her food. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the young man continued, stepping closer. "You actually claim to be a soldier. America must be really scraping the bottom of the barrel." His friends laughed, encouraging him. "Blake, she can't hear you," another one said loudly. "Too many explosions, probably." The cafe had gone quiet. A young waitress named Sarah stood, frozen coffee pot in hand, her eyes darting between Evelyn and her manager, Mr. Arthur, who was suddenly very busy with the register. "I hear just fine," Evelyn finally said, her voice steady but quiet. "Better than you might think." The ringleader, Blake, stood up and walked over, looking down at her. "So you're what? Some sort of veteran with a flag bracelet and everything? Cute accessory." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she tried once more to pick up the fallen food. Her fingers, damaged from the same explosion that took her legs, betrayed her. The muffin slipped again. The 3 men erupted in laughter. "Look at this. Can't even handle a muffin." Blake mimicked her movements, pretending to drop something while making exaggerated shaking motions. "This is our military hero, folks." Evelyn stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched tight as the laughter echoed through the suddenly silent cafe. The young waitress, her name tag read Sarah, approached with a replacement muffin, her eyes full of empathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, placing it carefully on Evelyn's table. This one's on the house. Before Evelyn could thank her, Blake's voice cut through again. Special treatment for the so-called veteran. What a surprise. Sarah's cheeks flushed red, but she hurried away without responding. Evelyn unwrapped the fresh muffin, slowly, her appetite gone. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the folded presidential letter before finding her wallet. Inside was a photo of her unit. 5 smiling faces in desert camo. 3 of them had black ribbons taped to the corners of the photograph. Around the cafe, other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An elderly man raised his newspaper higher, effectively blocking his view of the situation. A woman with 2 small children gathered her things and left quickly, eyes averted. A businessman tapped furiously on his phone, headphones firmly in place. No one spoke up. No one made eye contact except for one small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who stared openly at Evelyn from the next table. He wore a Captain America t-shirt and clutched a half-eaten book on military history. "Mommy," he stage whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That lady has a soldier bracelet like Uncle Dave's." His mother hushed him quickly, pulling him closer. Evelyn placed her hands on her wheels, preparing to leave early, something she'd never done in her 6 years of coming to this cafe. That's when her phone rang. The screen displayed Daniel, her son, with a photo of a handsome young man in military dress uniform. "Mom," his voice was clear through the speaker. "I just got a video from Sarah's brother. What's happening?" Evelyn's eyes darted to the young waitress who was pretending to wipe down a nearby table. "So that's how he knew." "It's nothing, sweetheart," Evelyn replied softly, trying to keep her voice even. "Just some kids being kids. I'm used to it." "Mom," his voice hardened. "Those aren't kids, they're grown men." "Daniel, please. I don't need—" "Where are you sitting right now?" Daniel cut in. "My usual corner." A pause. "Stay there." "Daniel, don't you dare!" But he had already hung up. Evelyn set her phone down and noticed Blake watching her, a smirk spreading across his face. Calling for backup, he mocked. "Maybe they'll send someone who can actually walk." His friends laughed again, though one seemed less enthusiastic than before, a hint of unease in his eyes. Evelyn closed her eyes, briefly took a deep breath, and opened the wrapped muffin. She began eating methodically, one bite at a time. Dignity intact despite the continued snickers from the nearby table. The small boy was still watching her, his eyes wide with something that looked remarkably like admiration, a rare glimmer of hope in a suffocating atmosphere. "What would you do if your mother was disrespected like this? If you believe respecting those who sacrificed is the minimum we owe them, type 'never forget' in the comments." Exactly 30 minutes after Evelyn's phone call, the ground seemed to vibrate. The sound of engines, powerful military engines, roared, filling the morning air in the quiet university campus. Through the cafe windows, everyone could see the convoy arrive. 2 Humvees and a light armored vehicle, all in desert tan, with military markings, pulled up. They parked with precision, blocking both the entrance to the parking lot and the view from the street, creating an imposing sight. Blake's smug smile faltered, his face beginning to pale. "What the hell?" he mumbled. The cafe fell into absolute silence as soldiers in combat uniforms, their faces grim and eyes sharp, emerged from the vehicles. 12 of them, each moving with disciplined precision, quickly formed a perimeter around the building. They didn't rush, didn't shout, just moved with a coordination that spoke of years of training and battlefield experience. The bell above the door jingled as a soldier entered. Tall and broad-shouldered, with captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders, and a face that held the weathered look of someone who had seen combat. His eyes scanned the room methodically, full of purpose, until they found Evelyn in her corner. Without hesitation, he walked directly to her table, stopped precisely 2 feet away, and snapped to attention, rendering a perfect military salute. "Sergeant Reed," he said, his voice carrying clearly and powerfully throughout the now silent cafe. The men and women of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion present and reporting. Evelyn's eyes widened in recognition. Daniel, she whispered, a mix of surprise and emotion flickering across her face. You shouldn't have. Blake and his friends had gone pale, their bravado evaporating in seconds, replaced by sheer fear and confusion. Daniel turned to face the cafe at large, but his gaze settled cold and unwavering on the three young men. This establishment, he announced, his voice steady, but commanding and resolute, has someone who deserves your respect. Sergeant Evelyn Reed, combat medic who lost the use of her legs while saving 3 soldiers from an IED in Kandahar in 2013. That woman, he pointed to Evelyn, his voice filled with pride and intensity, is my mother. One of Blake's friends shrank in his seat, trying to make himself as small as possible. Another muttered something that sounded like, "Oh shit," his voice trembling. Blake himself started to stand, perhaps to slip away, but found his path blocked by another soldier who had entered silently, a formidable presence like a wall. Going somewhere, the soldier asked quietly, his voice low and menacing. Is there something you'd like to say to a real soldier first? Evelyn remained seated, her face betraying no clear emotion, but a single tear tracked down her cheek, catching the morning light from the window, her only visible expression of deep emotion. Daniel knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, a gesture of profound love and reverence. He placed his unit's insignia patch on the table next to her half-eaten replacement muffin. The gesture, intimate yet publicly displayed, spoke volumes. The men who sent me home to you, he said softly, his voice still audible to everyone in the surrounding silence, asked me to give you this. He continued, his voice filled with pride. Sergeant Mitchell's son just finished basic. He says he joined because of the stories his father told about you. More soldiers filed in silently but imposing, lining the walls of the cafe. One by one, they came to attention, creating an impromptu guard of honor, an unassailable barrier of respect. The first soldier to enter after Daniel stepped forward. We apologize for being late, ma'am, he said formally. Traffic was heavier than anticipated in the university area. Evelyn looked around at the faces, some she recognized from photos Daniel had shared, others complete strangers, but all wore the same profound expression, respect. Mr. Arthur, the cafe owner, finally emerged from behind the counter for the first time since the incident began, his face a mix of shock and profound emotion. Sergeant Reed, he said, his voice unsteady, filled with reverence. Your money's no good here. Not today, not ever again. Daniel gently helped his mother navigate toward the door. The path was now lined with soldiers standing at attention, forming an aisle of honor. As they passed, each soldier saluted not out of obligation or command, but from genuine and deep respect. Throughout the cafe, people rose to their feet spontaneously and silently, as if in an unspoken apology. The elderly man who had hidden behind his newspaper now removed his cap and placed it over his heart, his eyes filled with regret and admiration. A woman whispered to her young daughter, her voice choked with emotion, "Remember her face. That's what courage looks like." Blake and his friends weren't arrested or forcibly removed. They didn't need to be. The power of the moment, the imposing presence and absolute reverence of the soldiers had accomplished what threats or punishments never could. Each hung his head as Evelyn passed, shame evident in their slumped postures and averted gazes. Suddenly, the small boy in the Captain America shirt broke away from his mother and ran to Evelyn's side. He thrust a crudely folded paper into her hands. It was a drawing, a woman in a wheelchair, wearing a cape like a superhero. You're my hero, he said simply, his voice full of admiration before running back to his mother. Evelyn smiled, her first genuine smile that morning, and carefully tucked the drawing alongside the presidential letter in her pocket. As they emerged into the sunlight, surrounded by Daniel's unit, Evelyn looked up at her son. You didn't have to do this. Yes, Mom, he replied, his eyes filled with love and conviction. We did. Some warriors never carry weapons but bear lifelong wounds so others can live freely. Sometimes a smile and a word are enough to show gratitude or ingratitude. The greatest battles aren't always fought on distant battlefields, but in everyday moments when we choose whether to honor sacrifice or mock it. If you believe sacrifice deserves to be honored with dignity, subscribe to HC Stories where silent heroes speak again. HC Stories where silent heroes speak.